Christian Castillo. I'm going to be presenting on the legacy of Henry Ford. Now, imagine the world without the automobiles today. It would take individuals significantly longer in order to be able to get to work, and it's just something that we all take for granted. Now, automobiles are the main source of transportation for most individuals in the United States, and historians around the world have been studying the effects of specifically Henry Ford's impact on the automotive industry and how it changed it forever. Now, although Elon Musk is rather an influential individual in the automotive industry, it is arguable and ultimately Henry Ford is the most influential individual in the automotive history because of three large contributions they had to the industry. The first being his assembly line, which then allowed the time that took to create cars to be decreased significantly. The second is his incorporation to that assembly line, the interchangeable parts. And then the third is his economic model of sort of this trickle-down economics. So Henry Ford had large improvements to the assembly line. He did not create the assembly line, but he created large improvements, which then created a belt that would then automatically have the cars that are on top of it start moving. And according to history.com, and Ford's assembly line starts rolling, the implementation of the assembly line allowed the employees to be able to construct a car in an hour and 30 minutes, whereas before it would take over 12 hours. So now before the assembly line, each individual would create one car themselves, but the assembly line, each individual would then add one part to that one car. And there would be multiple cars that would be going along at the same time, as you could see in this image that's then taken from Henry Ford's old factory. Henry Ford wouldn't have been near as impactful with this assembly line if it weren't for his incorporation of his interchangeable parts with the assembly line, because it wouldn't have been as efficient because the parts wouldn't have been able to go together as well. And it was then an idea that he then got from Eli Whitney's concept of interchangeable parts before, but it's Henry Ford's idea to then put interchangeable parts and the assembly line together that makes him very impactful in the automotive industry. And according to Parts Geek, in the history of the assembly line and interchangeable parts, Henry Ford did not create the concept of interchangeable parts, even though it is a large misconception that he did. He only took Eli Whitney's concept and then used it in the automotive industry. And without that incorporation, the assembly line, it still would have been active. It just wouldn't have been anywhere near as efficient, so it wouldn't have been anywhere as impactful as he was. And Henry Ford is also an economic model for business owners, and his increase in wages for his employees, according to Britannica and Fordism, depicts Henry Ford's economic model named Fordism is the concept that you get the cheaper parts and you then go ahead and gives you more funds for you to then be able to then give to your employees. And since he was then using the assembly line, that's a lot more boring and tedious of a job, whereas the mechanics had preferred to be making one whole entire car themselves. Instead, they're just adding on one part. So in order for Henry Ford to be able to convince his employees to stay, he then increased their wages, which then in turn allow them to actually be able to afford a car for themselves, which then creates this whole entire cycle where the cheaper parts, then the Henry Ford then has more money that he could then give to his employees, and then his employees then have money that they can then use to then buy cars, which then goes back to Henry Ford and allows individuals to just be able to get this this economic loop. And some might argue that Elon Musk is the most influential individual in the automotive history because he created a new sector in the automotive industry with his electric vehicles. And although it is true that Elon Musk did create a new sector, ultimately Henry Ford is the most influential, since the process that he created with the assembly line and the interchangeable parts is a process that even Elon Musk uses with Tesla and that every other automotive industry uses. Every automotive industry would not be near as successful or look the same if it weren't for Henry Ford.